3 natives young kept upside down until death, until the landowner showed. The sun was a malicious white eye in the vast, unforgiving sky, beating down on the cracked earth of the Arizona territory. The air was thick with talcum-fine dust that rose with every labored hooffall of the protagonist's aging bay mare settling on his leather duster and wide-brimmed Stetson hat. A constant dry wind whistled like a hungry ghost through the sparse mesquite and bleached-out rock formations. Silas Vance, 40-something, lean as a fence post and weathered like old timber, rode with a coiled tension. He wasn't a man running from anything, but a man running to a loneliness only the desert could provide. His Winchester repeating rifle rested secure in its saddle scabbard, and the worn grips of his Colt .45 Peacemaker peeked from the holster, tools of trade in a land where law was a suggestion and survival was gospel. The trail Silas followed was less a path and more a suggestion of passage, marked by sun-scorched scrub and the occasional bleached skull of a longhorn. The only sound was the creak of saddle leather and the muffled clinking of his spurs against the mare's flanks. He hadn't seen a living soul, white or native, for 3 days, and he preferred it that way. The quiet was a balm to a restless mind. He stopped near a small, dry wash, the time midday. The heat shimmered off the rocks in distorted waves. Silas dismounted, the dry leather of his chaps groaning, and pulled a canvas canteen. The water was lukewarm, but pure. As he drank, he noticed something that made the familiar lull of the desert snap into a sharp, sudden silence. 3 perfect fresh prints of moccasins near the rim of the wash. These weren't careless tracks. They were the measured, heel-first prints of a Chiricahua scout, deep enough to suggest purpose, recent enough to still hold the faint, earthy smell of damp leather. Silas tensed, his hand hovering over the Colt. The desert was a place of silent agreements. Seeing tracks meant you were seen. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," Silas muttered, the phrase dry in his throat. He led his mare to a meager patch of shade provided by a jutting rock face. He knew better than to be caught flat-footed in the open. Danger in this territory seldom knocked. Just as he finished staking the mare, a low, resonant drum beat, single and deep, rolled through the canyon. It wasn't loud, but it resonated in the chest like a warning from the earth itself. The hair stood up on the back of Silas's neck. He drew the Winchester. He looked up at the canyon ridge, where the sky met the rock in a harsh line. Slowly, silently, figures began to appear. Apache warriors, mounted on tough, wiry ponies, their faces painted with earth pigments, their silence more terrifying than any war cry. They seemed to materialize from the sun and shadow, dozens of them, surrounding the small basin. The click of the Winchester's lever was a deafening sound in the oppressive silence. Silas didn't raise the rifle, but held it ready. He knew 1 bullet for him, 30 arrows for his horse. He was trapped. A tall, formidable man, the chief on a pinto horse, moved forward, his gaze flat and unreadable beneath a worn piece of trade cloth tied around his head. He carried no rifle, only a long, bone-handled knife sheathed at his belt. He halted 20 feet away. "You ride hard, White Eye. Your shadow tells me you watch your back but not your front." The chief's voice was a low grumble of desert thunder, the English perfectly pronounced, laced with quiet threat. Silas kept his posture loose, but ready. "My thanks for the information, Chief. Didn't mean to trespass on your land. Just passing through. My name is Silas Vance." "Passing through is what the locust says." The chief's eyes drifted to the Colt. "You carry the stick of the snake. You got business here?" "No business but solitude, partner, and water. I'm a rancher, working a small claim 40 miles west, land of dry bones and buzzards. Not much to tempt a proud people." The warrior smiled, a tight, grim shift of the mouth that didn't reach his eyes. His gaze was fixed, calculating. Silas felt the weight of every eye on him, a heavy, suffocating pressure. He knew this was the first test. "A rancher, a man who fences the sky. We saw your place, Vance. You own much, but you hold little. Tell me, landowner, What is the price of water on your claim? The silence, after the chief's question, was long and brittle, broken only by the nervous snort of Silas's mare and the rattling hum of a cicada in the scrub. The Apache warriors, silent and patient, maintained their perimeter. Silas felt the raw, primal fear, but years of isolation had taught him that terror was a luxury he couldn't afford. Water's free, Chief. The desert owns it, we just borrow it. I trade it for respect. Always have. Silas's voice was low and firm, his eyes locked on the chief's. He hadn't flinched. The chief, whose name Silas would later learn was Taza, nodded slowly, a hint of something unreadable, maybe respect, maybe disdain, in the gesture. Respect is a river that often dries up, Vance. My scouts told me of the 3 ropes. You ride alone, but you carry much, like a man preparing for a long winter or a short fight. I ride prepared. It's a hard country. You know that. Taza gestured with a chin movement toward a deep, narrow crack in the canyon wall, invisible until now. 2 young warriors descended from the ridge and rode toward it. A subtle signaling whistle, mimicking the call of a desert hawk, echoed from the chief, and the 2 men disappeared into the crevice. You want to pass through my land, you must know my trail. You will ride with us, Vance. Show us the sincerity in your spirit. Show us where the white man keeps his heart. Silas didn't hesitate. He knew refusing would mean a shallow grave beneath the sun. He slid the Winchester back into the scabbard. He kept the Colt holstered, but placed his hand lightly on the pommel of his saddle, a universal sign of trust, or at least non-aggression. I'll ride. Lead on, Taza. They rode in a tight, silent formation into the arroyo. The air here was marginally cooler, smelling faintly of sage and damp stone. The only sounds were the soft thud of unshod pony hooves and the constant, insistent whisper of the wind against the canyon walls. The sun began its slow, inevitable descent, bathing the landscape in a deep ochre and crimson light. They moved fast, the Apaches navigating the broken terrain with impossible ease. Silas was constantly checking the sun and the shadows, an instinct honed by the loneliness. This was a calculated capture, not a simple ambush. As they emerged onto a wide, dusty flat, Taza signaled a halt. The warriors spread out instantly, forming a quiet, efficient perimeter. In the distance, Silas could make out the dusty outline of a small, forgotten settlement, a collection of crude wooden shacks, and a single, taller building that had to be the saloon. Taza turned, his face framed by the deepening shadows of evening. We do not go there. That place is rotten. You will wait. Wait for what? Taza ignored the question, dismounted, and walked toward a small rock shrine marked by offerings of carved wood and colorful beads. He knelt, hands outstretched, muttering in his native tongue, a low, melodic sound that carried the weight of centuries and the sorrow of a vanishing people. Silas watched, respecting the moment. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the sound of a distant cheap wagon, the kind used by miners or, worse, bounty hunters. It came rattling up the main trail, kicking up a furious cloud of dust that glowed orange in the last light. Taza rose instantly, his eyes narrowed, the spiritual moment banished by the brutal reality of the borderland. The wagon stopped 20 yards from the rock shrine, and 4 men, hard, unwashed, wearing the threadbare jackets of the border militia, dismounted, heavily armed with shotguns and old, unreliable Springfield rifles. The leader, a thick-necked man in a grease-stained derby hat, spotted Silas and the silent ring of warriors. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Well, looky here, a proper jamboree, and a white tenderfoot surrounded by Injuns. Howdy, partner, you looking for a short ride to the grave?" The stench of cheap whiskey and unwashed wool rolled off the militia leader, whose name was Stubbs. The Apaches remained motionless, their silence a profound physical threat. The Colt on Silas's hip suddenly felt cold and inadequate. "Just passing through, Stubbs, you know how it is. Didn't catch your name, but your manners ain't worth a plug nickel. The name's Stubbs, and I ain't here for pleasantries, boy. This ain't your concern. We got a warrant from the territorial judge for some filthy runaways. They're ours, or we collect from you." Taza stepped forward, his posture rigid. He spoke, not to Stubbs but to Silas, switching to a guttural tone in his own tongue, then back to English. "They seek the young ones, the pups of our spirit. They hide like coyotes, but their sickness touches everything." Silas understood. The militia wasn't after a raid, they were after specific individuals. He felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a moral abyss. "I don't know nothing about no runaways, Stubbs. You ain't got jurisdiction out here. This is God's country, and he don't read warrants." "That a fact?" Stubbs cackled a harsh, dry sound. He pulled a piece of faded paper from his coat pocket. "Got paid by a Boston land baron who wants his indentured hands back. 3 young bucks. Ran off 2 weeks ago. Heard they were heading to the hills. $100 a head. Enough to buy you a new life and a better horse, Vance." The temptation was a brief, metallic taste on Silas's tongue. He had money, but $300 was a fortune. He looked at Taza, whose face was a study in controlled rage. Then he saw the Apache women and children hiding in the shadows of the rocks, watching. "My life ain't for sale, Stubbs, and neither are people. Back off." The challenge was delivered in a voice low and flat, stripped of all pleasantness. It carried the authority of a man who rarely spoke, but always meant what he said. Stubbs's grin vanished. He pulled his shotgun up, the dry click of the hammer being cocked, echoing sharply. "You picked your side, squawman. We'll take the landowner's justice out of your hide, then we'll take the bucks." Before Stubbs could level the gun, the 2 young Apache warriors who had scouted the crevice reappeared. They were not alone. They were supporting 3 young Apache men, barely teenagers, their faces bruised, their breathing ragged. And the young men's wrists were bound to the wagon's tailgate by 3 short ropes, pulling their hands painfully above their heads. "See there, Vance!" Stubbs yelled triumphantly. "We found 'em tied up back there. Looks like some righteous pilgrim already started the job for us. Kept upside down until death. That's the landowner's way of teaching a lesson." Silas's gaze darted to the ropes. The 3 young men were exhausted, their bodies marked by previous lashings. Taza let out a guttural sound of anguish, a sharp, choked noise like a broken branch snapping in a storm. The warriors tightened their circle, their bows drawn. "You touch them, you die," Taza hissed, the words cutting through the air like thrown knives. Stubbs merely laughed, firing the shotgun into the air, a deafening blast that sent dust and feathers flying. "First blood is yours, Injun, but the 3 ropes stay tied. We got the upper hand." The air after the shotgun blast was thick with gunpowder smoke and the tension of impending violence. The Apaches were a hair's breadth from charging, but Taza's raised hand held them back, his eyes glued to the plight of the young men. Wisdom wrestled with fury in the chief's face. Silas knew a direct charge was suicide. He had to break the enemy's line of sight and use the landscape. He subtly placed his right foot on a loose pile of scree, kicking a handful of small, sharp rocks against the wagon wheel. The unexpected sound momentarily drew Stubbs's attention. "Draw your Colt, Stubbs. Let's make this fair." "Fair?" Stubbs sneered. "Fair is for Sunday sermons. You die first." Stubbs, confident in his shotgun's spread, swung the barrel toward Silas. But in the fraction of a second, Silas lunged not at the man, but behind his mare. He yanked the Winchester from the scabbard, using the mare's body as a temporary shield. Crack! The rifle shot was sharp and clean, echoing loudly in the canyon. Silas didn't aim for Stubbs. He aimed for the left front axle of the wagon. The round struck true, and the wheel gave way with a sickening groan of splintering wood. The wagon sagged violently, throwing the 3 young natives, still tied, into painful, awkward angles. Confusion and chaos erupted among the militia. They scattered, trying to regain balance, their formation broken. The Apaches saw their chance. A volley of arrows hissed through the air, finding their marks in the dirt around the militiamen's feet, a clear warning. Silas dropped the Winchester, knowing he needed speed, and drew the Colt .45. He moved with the practiced grace of a man whose life depended on his speed. He was a blur of dust and black leather. Taza! The ropes! Silas rushed Stubbs, who was fumbling with a cartridge belt, trying to reload the shotgun. The other militiamen were pinned by the Apache arrows and the sudden loss of the wagon. This was the duel, short and brutal. "You ain't no rancher!" Stubbs snarled, finally clearing the shotgun. But Silas was faster. He didn't fire. He pistol-whipped Stubbs across the temple with the heavy barrel of the Colt. The sound was a dull, sickening thud of bone and metal. Stubbs dropped like a sack of flour, the shotgun clattering uselessly on the ground. Taza and two warriors rushed past Silas toward the overturned wagon, their bone-handled knives flashing as they cut the three ropes, freeing the young men. The tension evaporated instantly, replaced by the low murmur of the Apache language, words of comfort and relief. The remaining militiamen, seeing their leader unconscious and their quarry freed, made a break for their horses. "Don't let 'em run!" one warrior yelled in Apache. "Hold!" Taza commanded, holding up a hand, his attention solely on the injured boys. "Let the coyotes run. We have what is ours." The militiamen scrambled onto their horses and galloped away, leaving the broken wagon, their weapons, and the unconscious Stubbs. The dust cloud they raised was the only sound of their defeat. Silas stood breathing heavily, the acrid smell of gunpowder stinging his nostrils, the Colt still smoking slightly. He holstered the gun, feeling the exhaustion settle in his bones. He had passed the test of courage. Taza approached, his face no longer fueled by rage, but by an austere gratitude. He looked Silas up and down, then extended a hand, a gesture rare for a chief. "The Comanche taught me to shake, but my people teach to see. You saved our sons. You are not a simple landowner, Vance. You are a protector." "I'm a man who hates a dirty trick, Taza. That's all. I didn't do it for your people. I did it for mine." Night had fallen, and the temperature had dropped sharply, a hallmark of the desert. The sky was an immense velvet-black sheet pierced by a billion cold, glittering stars, a sight that always made Silas feel both small and utterly free. The air now smelled of cedar smoke and roasted meat. Silas sat at the edge of the Apache camp, a hidden oasis nestled deep in the canyons. He was given a piece of buffalo jerky and a drink of strong, bitter tea. He didn't speak, but simply observed. The three young men were being tended to by the women, their wounds washed with cool, herb-scented water. The atmosphere was one of solemn, controlled joy. The warriors gathered around a fire, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. The chief Taza sat opposite Silas, drawing shapes in the sand with a stick, a map of the territory perhaps, or a story. Why did they run, Taza? Those boys? They did not run. They sought to escape the white man's work. The rancher who bought them taught them the lesson of the rope. They were slaves, Vance. Their hands were needed for the harvest, but their spirits remained with the mountain gods. Slaves. The word tasted like rust in Silas's mouth. Slavery had been outlawed, but the borderlands made their own laws, bought and paid for by land barons and corrupt judges. Stubbs said he was working for a Boston land baron. "Who is he?" Taza looked up, his eyes meeting Silas's. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the severe lines of tradition and suffering. "Colonel Elias Thorne. He bought every acre from the Rio Grande to the foothills. He sends his jackals to steal our soil and our sons. He is the sickness in the heart of the land. He is a snake without a rattlesnake's honor." Silas whistled softly. Colonel Thorne was an old money titan whose name was synonymous with ruthless expansion. He had heard the rumors. Thorne's agents were using false imprisonment and indentured servitude to cultivate enormous cotton and cattle operations. "You've made a powerful enemy, Taza. You and your people. Enemies are the mountain we climb. You also made an enemy tonight. Stubbs will return, and he will bring the full iron fist of the Thorne payroll. They will not forget the broken wheel or the defeat. I know. A man who draws iron must be ready to use it. Taza smiled again, a rare, genuine expression of respect. He reached into a small pouch and pulled out a perfectly carved piece of jet, shaped like a soaring hawk. This is a spirit gift. It means we see your heart. You were tested and you did not fail. You kept the code of the land to protect the helpless, even the ones you do not know. You are now our ally, Vance. We ride to the river tomorrow. The real fight is coming. A sudden, sharp howl cut through the desert night. It was not a coyote. It was the distinct modulated signal of a man on the watch. A warrior came running into the firelight, his eyes wide and agitated. "Chief, the scout is back. Thorne's men, they ride hard, twice as many. They pass the canyon and they know our trail." Taza stood immediately, his quiet composure returning. The Apache camp was a whirlwind of silent, efficient preparation. Rifles were checked, bows strung, children gathered and hidden. They seek blood for blood. They will come at dawn. We will meet them on the mesa where the canyon opens up. Taza looked directly at Silas, handing him a Winchester, a newer model than his own, well-oiled and maintained. "You are welcome to leave now, Vance. Your debt is paid." "My debt ain't paid until the debt of the land is paid, Taza. I'm in. Where does Thorne's army expect us to make our stand?" The gateway of the old gods was a narrow, winding pass, high on a ridge overlooking a vast, flat plain. The first light of dawn was a blood-orange smear on the horizon, illuminating the dust-choked scene. The air was cold and crisp, a brief respite before the sun's cruelty. The Apaches, with Silas among them, had taken their positions. They were dug in behind rock formations, silent, their faces grimly determined. Silas, lying prone with the borrowed Winchester, felt the rough stone cutting into his elbows. He wore a single feather Taza had given him, tucked into his hatband, a sign of solidarity. He could hear the distant growing thunder of hooves. The sound was immense, not of a few riders, but of a full company, Thorne's private army. "They ride like the devil's army," Taza muttered, lying next to Silas. He held a high-powered Sharps rifle, a relic of the Civil War, its long barrel glinting faintly. "Remember the children, Vance. That is why we fight." "I remember. They won't get a clear shot at you, Taza. I got your back." The militia appeared at the base of the ridge, about 30 men, led by a stern-faced lieutenant, heavily armed with repeating rifles and carbines. They spread out, a line of cold steel and unforgiving eyes. The lieutenant raised a bugle to his lips and sounded a short, sharp blast, not a charge, but a demand. "Apaches! Surrender the fugitives. We demand the landowner, Silas Vance, and the 3 runaways. Surrender or die." Taza did not move. He waited until the echo died in the pass, letting the silence speak the volume of their defiance. "We will give you nothing but the dust beneath your feet," Taza yelled back, his voice amplified by the canyon walls. The lieutenant hesitated, clearly surprised by the presence of a white man fighting alongside the natives. The tension stretched thin. The air seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Silas took aim. The sight of the rifle settled perfectly on the lieutenant's chest. He didn't want to kill, but he had to break their nerve. Crack! Silas fired, not at the lieutenant, but at the rock face directly above his head. A shower of stone splinters rained down, missing the man by inches. The unexpected shot, from a white man with that accuracy, caused a visible ripple of fear and confusion in the militia ranks. The Apaches followed up with a quick, devastating volley of arrows, aimed not at the men but at their horses. Whinnies of pain and distress erupted. The cavalry line shattered. The battle devolved into a brutal, close-quarters skirmish. Silas worked the Winchester's lever with machine-like efficiency, focusing on suppressing fire and disarming men by shooting their weapon hands. He moved with a kind of fatalistic calm, paying his penance in gunpowder and smoke. Taza fought with the controlled ferocity of a wolf protecting its den. They fought side by side, reloading and covering each other. the line between landowner and warrior completely erased. After a fierce, prolonged exchange, the lieutenant, seeing his men falling and demoralized by the surprise attack, gave the order to retreat. The retreat was a rout. Thorn's men, shattered, defeated, turned their horses and fled back down the ridge, leaving their wounded and their dead. Taza stood, breathing hard, looking down at the plain. The battlefield was littered with abandoned gear, bloodied dust, and the silence of the defeated. They will not return today, Vance, but Thorn will not forget. Silas knelt beside a dying militiaman, a young boy with a frightened face, and gave him a canteen of water. Violence was never clean, and victory was always bitter. Taza approached. He took the Sharps rifle and placed it at Silas's feet. You fought with honor. You have a straight tongue and a quick gun. Your presence here is a sign of the mountain's spirits. I did what was right, Taza, that's all. Taza looked out over the vast, empty plains stretching toward the sunset. He spoke softly, with a profound wisdom that carried the sorrow of generations. Justice is not a law, Vance. Justice is a choice. You chose to honor the land and the young ones. The 3 boys are free, but the fight for the land has just begun. Silas mounted his mare, feeling the weight of the day and the unspoken debt he now carried. He looked at Taza, who stood surrounded by his victorious people, the sunset turning their faces to bronze. I'll be back, Chief, when you need a fast gun or a straight answer. Taza simply nodded, his eyes distant, fixed on the horizon where the sun was finally sinking, leaving the sky in a spectacular, bloody farewell. Silas turned the mare and rode away, not back to his solitary claim, but toward the future, a future where his simple ranch became the silent, final frontier of honor in a lawless world, forever bound to the land and the people he had chosen to protect. The justice of the frontier was complex, but the code of the heart was simple.